Hello and welcome to my case study on human nutrition for CQ University Term 1 2021. So in today's presentation it will be a completed case study on Damon Moore, who has been my participant. He's currently 23 years old and he's male. The case study's purpose was to understand Damon's diet from a three-day food recall, as long as an interview that I completed before the 3-day food call with him on about 24 hours of what he currently ate. The two different food recalls will then be examined and put through to understand how Damon can improve his diet and what he's currently doing that's already effective for his body and for him to stay healthy. Damon's 23 years old. He's currently working casually. He's at uni full time and plays a lot of sport as well, including touch football, rugby league and rugby union. He doesn't take any medications or supplements. He's currently 85 kilos, 183 centimetres tall, and his waist circumference is 91 centimetres. He still lives at home. Obviously, his parents cook some meals for him, but he does cater for a lot of it himself as well. So his cooking skills are very basic though, and obviously has 3 to 4 meals a day with snacks in between. He believes he has about 2 litres of water a day currently, but if on sporting days and during sports, obviously that increases quite significantly. The advantages and disadvantages of the food recalls will be discussed, so what was found and what worked effectively. Issues that we encountered along the way throughout the 4 days, technically, including the single one with the interview. We'll look at the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating and how Damon can effectively use this to improve his current diet. Suggestions for Damon, for the participant, for how he can improve, judged by the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, and using the 5 food groups to see what he's currently missing out of or might not have enough of. And finally, we'll look at his anthropometric measures, his BMI, and how, if he's at risk, not at risk, or basically perfectly in between. So to start off with, the 24-hour food recall was an interview between Damon and I, and we just went back through one day about what he had during that day. One thing that is involved with this is obviously the participant has to remember what he's had the past 24 hours and obviously has to be honest. So it's quite easy for anyone to basically say whatever they wanted, really. They could, but it's in trust that you hope they be honest for their best reasoning, so that they can get the most out of the case study and see how they can improve their diet. So a typical day for Damon's up quite around 7 o'clock-ish, and then he has his 3 to 4 meals with snacks in between, as I mentioned earlier. But during this, the 24 hours can obviously be quite different from any other 24 hours. If he had an event on that day, a party, he was away at a sports thing or had a lot of sport on, his diet might significantly change for one day. So that's why a 24-hour food recall is effective, but not as effective as other methods that we will discuss later on. So a 3-day food recall is probably a much better option than a 1-day recall. You get to see 3 different days and how each day differs from each other day, basically. So it was 3 days in a row, obviously, and each time Damon basically put something in his mouth, he had to record it for the purpose of the case study. So in Damon's case, we worked out that it'd be best if we went Thursday, Friday and Saturday. That way we got in a weekend as well, so Saturday being the weekend day, obviously. And just to see if anything did differ on a Saturday. It was actually a weekend that Damon had off, surprisingly. Normally he's at some sort of sport every Saturday, but he had a weekend off, so his diet probably did change a little bit for this Saturday as well, typically, as he actually went to the pub for lunch, as we'll get into later on. So the significant advantages is obviously it's simple and effective method if it's followed effectively by the participant. Obviously it's sometimes not always easy for them to constantly be thinking about the recall, and every time they do put something into their body, it has to be written down. It's effective. It is a quite quick method, even for dietitians if they wanted to see how someone's diet is. It's only 3 days. Go back and visit and basically go from there. And it's cost effective for example, if businesses or something wanted to run it too, they don't have to be with the person for a period of time. It's purely relied on the individual to make sure that they participated effectively, okay, and be honest within their food recall. Because if they're not honest, then that obviously stops a lot of the truthfulness, and will only affect them when they can see how they can improve their diet. And looking at the other side, the disadvantages, obviously it relies, as I mentioned, heavily on their participant to be accurate and honest. Okay, so they have to understand that and a good example is Damon's written down he had white bread toasted with butter for breakfast one day. If it helps if Damon, as I did ask him to, but he didn't, but that's fine, to supply like what sort of butter he used, margarine, even the brand of white bread. I know white bread's mostly similar, but obviously sometimes Woolies to Brumbies to Coles it'll be slightly different. So to get an exact measurements, it's important that for the purpose to get the best results, that everything's provided. But mostly Damon's provided with good information, and even he's obviously noted about how much of different foods he was consuming. So, for example, on the first day he had ham sandwiches for lunch by the looks, and he's had 100 grams of ham with his sandwiches. So it's good how you can look at someone's diet exactly and see actually how much is going into their body. Another negative though is often participants, because they know they're being measured or looked at, they might change their diet. So that means if for example, if I'm being recorded, you might say, oh, I feel like a chocolate, but then you're like, oh, I better not have that, purely because you're being assessed. Whereas it's the most effective way is to be honest, because that's the most you're going to get out of it. And in this case study, it seems that Damon has been. I see on the Saturday, the day he had off, he's obviously gone to the pub for lunch by the looks, and he's had a few beers, which is no dramas at all. And he's written them in. He's written a schooner, which is 425 mils, and he's had 3 of them. Whereas I think a lot of the time people wouldn't be honest, and they could possibly lie and say they didn't have those beers, or they only had 2, for example. But as I mentioned, the best way to do it is more information the better, basically. 3 days is obviously a good period, because you should be able to see roughly what the participant is eating, but in hindsight, the longer the better, basically. So if you can somehow get a whole week of a food recall, then that's probably best, because that gives the person assessing a lot more information and will give them better results to be able to look at. But 3 days is definitely better than 1 day, as mentioned earlier, and 7 would obviously be a lot better and even longer. But practically 3 days is perfect for a food recall. So moving on, and issues encountered with the food recalls was, as I mentioned, Damon's, at times he lacked a little bit of, not knowledge, but just would miss a few key things in like branding, at times amounts, and also times. A lot of the time he would actually forget to even write into his food diary or into the table that I provided with him. So he'd often come home at night time or in the afternoons, and he'd be like, oh, I better complete this, and often he'd forget. So he's sort of not making it up, but he's got to rejig his memory to go back to morning, lunch, and work out exact times and what he actually had and how much as well. But it's from Damon's 3 days, it can be seen that he's mostly put in his times that look pretty effectively and would sound about right too, from breakfast, lunch and dinner, and then obviously snacks in between. As I mentioned, Damon is very busy with sport, university and work, and that's why sometimes it can be hard for the participant to remember to put in everything. And obviously Damon, I'd probably assume that he would have forgotten some things, but it's important that most were covered from the 3-day food recall. But if I was to do it again, I'd definitely be on top of it and try and remind Damon constantly throughout the day to fill in the table, so that way it's the best results we can find possible from the case study. So the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating is a very commonly used thing in Australia, obviously, and looks at the 5 different food groups from grains, meats, dairies, fruit and vegetables, and basically how much or what's best for your body and how much you should be consuming daily. From Damon's 3 days, it's easy to see he obviously consumes a fair amount of meats, dairy and wheat products, but probably lacks a little bit in the fruit and vegetables section. So obviously with his breakfast he has proteins, and coffee is obviously provided through dairy, which he has 2 a day normally. And then grains through breads, biscuits and others that he has as well, through pastas, lasagna, beef lasagna that he had one night as well. So he covers most food groups, but he just lacks fruit and vegetables mainly. He does eat some vegetables, but he did mention he doesn't eat any salads, so lettuce, tomato, whereas he will eat broccoli, corn. I think I saw he had potato one night. But throughout the 4 days total, I did notice he only had one piece of fruit, and it was a banana one day. So he lacks heavily in the fruit side of things, which we can definitely look at and provide him with some ways to improve this. So suggestions for Damon, obviously, to start off with, would be to implement more fruit and vegetable into his daily diet. Doing this, it can be just changing snacks for some healthier snacks to try and improve more fruit into his diet. So instead of having, for example, on the Saturday he had pizza shapes with some French onion dip, just add some sort of even a dairy cheese into that to make it a little bit more healthy, or as I said, swap it out for a banana, an apple, some sort of fruit or watermelon, because he did mention he likes fruit, but he just doesn't seem to consume it. So it's important that overall he tries to improve that. The other noticeable one was probably the amount of water Damon consumes, particularly as he said he's very busy with sports. It's important he provides his body with a lot of water. So he should be having, at least with the amount of sport he mentioned to me, which is basically training for probably 2 hours daily with gym, field activities and then playing games as well. Definitely 1.5 to 2 hours. He should be having at least probably 5 litres of water, including while he's having his water during sports. Currently he probably only has about 2 litres a day, which probably isn't enough sufficiently for his body to keep reproducing and sweating it out. Because obviously you're training at a high intensity, you're sweating a lot, and you need to try and replace them fluids immediately for your body to function effectively. Damon's arithmetic measures are quite interesting. His height is 183 centimetres, weight 85 kilos, and his waist circumference being 91 centimetres, which brings his BMI to a 25.4, which is completely low risk, so it's no dramas at all with Damon's weight. He's certainly not overweight, he's definitely not underweight. He's in a really good stage at the moment, but it's important that Damon tries to maintain that. So he's got to implement the changes I mentioned earlier, the fruits, the more vegetables, drinking more water, trying to exchange different snacks for different things, and even for lunches, dinners, just thinking about what he's consuming into his body. Compared to the Australian standards, Damon is fine with his weight, height and waist circumference at the moment. As I mentioned, he's not at risk at all of being overweight or underweight. So as long as he maintains that, he shouldn't have any major health issues with diabetes, heart problems in the future. To conclude, the 24-hour recall and 3-day recall can give a good understanding of what an individual eats day to day, and the amount of food that the individual consumes within his or her diet. Problems are always going to arise when completing a recall, as I mentioned, with forgetfulness, not remembering the amount, the time that you ate. But if a participant can be as accurate and as honest as they possibly can, then that's going to make it more effective for the person doing the case study and providing details for the individual to improve their diet or maintain a healthy lifestyle. The case study's proven that the participant can thoroughly improve his diet to maintain a healthy lifestyle through consuming more fruit, vegetables and water. With Damon's current amount of meats, dairy and grains he's eating, which is fine, it suits the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating, he can maintain and become a much more healthier person by implementing more fruit and vegetables into his diet, as in giving the body more nutrients, which it needs to be more effective and switched on throughout the day. As I mentioned just earlier, the participant's not at risk of being unhealthy at all, overweight or underweight. Damon is obviously currently active, so providing he continues to maintain his current trends and eating efficiently, with trying to add some more fruit and vegetables into his diet, he shouldn't be at any risk of any problems that will arise due to his lifestyle through eating, drinking, sleeping, etc. Thanks very much for tuning in. I hope you appreciate this. Thanks.